Welcome to Women We Should Know with international speaker, mindset reset mentor, author, and your host, Leslie Michaels. With audacious honesty and candor, the Women We Should Know podcast presents the wisdom and life-empowering insights of women who are the embodiments of innovation and social evolution. Please join Leslie as she shares potent conversations that will inspire your personal and professional evolutions. Welcome to Women We Should Know.
Welcome back to Women We Should Know, the podcast where we consistently bring you the voices, the audacity, the great societal changes that women are making around the world. These are women who color outside of the lines, who refuse to climb inside of boxes created by someone else. And the most brilliant thing about each of these women who come to visit us are that as they are carving a pathway, a new pathway for themselves, they are always leaving the lights on so that others can follow. And it is an incredible honor and privilege to be here and have these conversations with these women. And we have just such an amazing woman all the way from the UK for you today, Dr. Dr Hasson. She has a hope of helping women politicians to feel seen in their experience and seen in the way that they navigate politics and the political arena, seen in their experiences of trying to be soulful and connecting a whole heart-centered leader. Victoria's hope is that she will enable women to feel encouraged and supported, knowing that their experiences genuinely matter, not simply to people like us that are here on the podcast or listening in, but to women and people across the board and around the world. It is a privilege to have this amazing woman with us today. Hello, Victoria. How are you?
Oh, I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm just really moved by your introduction there. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
You are so welcome. I would like to start with a little bit of your story. You have a truly unique story that just screams of quiet, unrelenting power. How did you get to where you are in this moment?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. Yeah, I think my approach is one of inquiry and investment. So I started out sort of inquiring into how parliamentary practices and procedures changed at the end of apartheid in South Africa, and how not having been a member of any democratic institution to suddenly go into it, what that must feel like, what you do with that power, and how you sort of shapeshift sort of old ways of doing politics, which I looked at in South Africa. And then after I did that inquiry, I then invested a lot, my heart and soul, in trying to help politicians in that parliament sort of do it in ways that were inclusive and participatory, but also very importantly in ways that try to sort of hold power to account. And it's been like that sort of back and forth of inquiry and investment. I sort of always question, and then I test and invest in what I've tested in the inquiry to try and support politicians. Until I really feel like I have an understanding of what it feels like to be a politician, and how that impacts then what they do, and more importantly the quality of our democratic processes. I obviously very much care about politicians as humans, and make that link between how they feel and then how that shapes what they then do and the way they lead us.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. And one of the things that makes your approach and your intentionality so unique is that you do love politicians. And maybe this is why you are more effective in speaking truth to power. That they understand, they can feel that you have an affinity, but that doesn't mean that they're going to get away with a lot of bad business.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, because I sometimes feel like my office is a confessional space, because they know they can't hide. So they know they can't really get away with not being seen. Eventually, they're very layered, obviously, but in the end they know they're safe. To do the confession, it'll come out, and they know that not only will they be seen, but they'll be safe in that. So I've sort of always a foreigner wherever I work. So I think there's a safety in that as well. That that I can then hold them to account for things that aren't what they're being held to account for by their electorate. So I'm holding them to account for themselves. I'm wanting them to use the political experience to shape themselves, because otherwise they will certainly be shaped by politics and being a politician and the political experience. And so it's really important, because I see that holding themselves to account for their own inner humanity, and the quality and status of that, as well as state, to me is a democratic service. You know, they are to me a service. I care very much about their well-being, mental health, leadership, soulfulness.
Absolutely. Their mental health and their ability to be connected with themselves is, as you know, and as you are working toward, that is what is going to determine how they do support their electorate or how they just run over them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're seeing a lot of that over here in the US right now. We're seeing a lot of running over. Maybe you should come over here for a while. But I suspect you have your hands full right there in the UK, especially with your new prime minister. What motivated you to get into this field, to pursue your PhD and to follow this path?
Yeah, well, the scholarship was the competition, so it was a bit of a surprise when I got it. But then when I think really the answer to that question has to be sort of working in the National Assembly of South Africa with politicians after I finished the study. The finding of the study was fascinating. I learned that despite what, say, the politicians, thought, their thoughts, their actual actions were sort of, I guess, misaligned with their thoughts about how they were acting and behaving. And I realized then that feelings became very important. Mm-hmm. And then working with them in Parliament, I realized that there was this inner world going on that was shaping, obviously, their actions. And it became very obvious very quickly that this was a gap in support, and that there was much less support available to helping politicians work through all of the inner challenges that they were facing. Mm-hmm. And that gap was very difficult for anybody to fill. It was difficult for them to know how to fill it with therapy and well-being. They have very little time, and they also have very little privacy. And it's also very difficult for therapists to know how to fill. Politicians often talk about feeling disengaged and disconnected from therapists, and also very difficult for coaches to fill directly, having not been in that world as well. And even if there are so many similarities with the world of business, mm-hmm. It's just not easy to just throw the same old tricks at them. They can't do the things that they should do in order to be effective leaders, that the business coaches are very aware of. And so I think that compelled me to try to spend as much time as I could inquiring into how to help them whilst I was working with them in various different countries and contexts and projects, and to try to work out how to fill that gap, because it was a a big gap. It is an enormous gap. These individuals are enormously important to our futures. And if there is a gap in their ability to seek help, get support, grow, develop themselves whilst doing the job and service also their mental health, then we definitely have a problem. So I think that was a key motivating, just seeing this gap and the problem and the challenges they face with their inner world.
I would imagine that it's even more complicated in Africa. I have friends who have gone over there, a nurse who went over there to work for a number of years, another friend who is currently in Cape Town, and I have another friend who's from Ghana. She met a young man and came to the United States 40 years ago, but has gone back every year to take their son so that he has connection. And so I've had very tiny understandings that are maybe more than someone else who has not even that much direct connection. With the diversity of Africa, it's not like the UK where there's the South and then there's London, but there's a greater similarity or continuity, or even in the United States, you can't really tell it right now, but we do have a continuity. There is a one presiding rule of law, as it were. How does the diversity of Africa, the diversity of cultures in Africa, impact the political scene and the work you were doing within the political sector?
For the broader context, it complicated every single policy issue. And I was used to a politics where you could read it along red and blue and green,
right?
Particularly, maybe throw in a yellow, but that would be it. Really, it's on ideological lines, but really all fairly center ground. But obviously in Africa, it's on racialized grounds, it's on ethnicity, it's on your tribe, and every policy issue will have more or less resonance with the multiple dialects, ethnicities, racial groups. And then on top of that, you can throw a load of patriarchy and gender politics, which is differentiated amongst each of the population groups within any country. But the bottom line is that in the end, I realized that the political experience, sort of essentially built on patriarchy and all of its colors in the different countries, is quite similar in most parts of the world that I've worked in. And that was actually quite fascinating. I think essentially the constitutional role is the same. How it's shaped and all of the factors that go into a politician's life, all are shaped by that particular country context and also political system. But in the end, what they are charged with doing and the type of person that decides to put themselves forward and be charged with doing it is a similar experience. And that's in the end also then the pain points that they identify as really sort of rumbling through in different measures are comparative across all cultures and contexts. So I essentially found that the political experience is a shared one. So the particular factors will differ, and of course the diversity in Africa is one of those, but on the inside, what's going on in their inner world is so comparative across different cultures and contexts. The language that's used to describe that also may differ, but what they're referring to is essentially that same similar shared challenge of having blocks in rumbling through their own inner world and the challenges that they face as a human trying to deliver democracy.
Right. And I suppose there's some comfort in the fact that the patriarchy is consistent around the world. At least around the world, we know what we're facing. It's not a different animal in each different place, we know exactly what the ground rules are and exactly where the oppression points are and the pain points, right?
Yeah, exactly. How they tackle it changes a little bit. I mean,
Yes.
I admire all of the forms in which they try to rage against that particular machine, which is very beautiful and colourful. But yeah, yes, at least we know what you would probably call the enemy, one of them.
What I would probably call the enemy. I think that's a safe bet any day of the week. Now, all of this was complicated by the Russians. Isn't
Yes,
that
the
right?
war in Ukraine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so then came the transition from Africa and working with their politicians and working to subdue the patriarchal voices in their heads and in their hearts and these long trained traditions. And you're back in the UK.
Yeah, back in Europe. Yeah.
Yes. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, that was a really big transition. I had been working in the National Assembly for 4 years, heart and soul, for a political party and set of leaders, and loved it. Absolutely loved it, and I still think I won't get a better life than what I had doing that. Full of purpose and meaning. It just wasn't very balanced. Let's put it that way. And I guess, a heart to heart with my dad meant that I realized if I was wanting to sort of meet somebody and balance out, that I probably had to get a different job, which made me really reflect hard on why I couldn't have it all. And I knew that he was right. And that in fact, I just knew it was going to be really difficult to invest in trying to meet somebody and be in Parliament the amount of hours I was there. And then I had also seen this journey in politicians I was working for, and how quite a lot of the ones that I admired were not able to stay in politics for a lot of the pain point reasons that I identified. And those two things aligned to make me think that I really wanted to transition into actually inquiry again, work out how politicians can stay well and stay balanced in the political experience, particularly when they are so admired, so soulful, so ambitious, and so good for a
Yes.
country.
Yes.
So that sort of was a shared experience, I think, with them, with particularly some other female politicians that I was working with, and I felt okay. I had the position and the privilege to journal, to reflect, to work out what that gap could look like and how it could be filled, and return to Europe to do that. And so yes, it was this lack of being able to have it all.
And what strikes me as you speak of that is the obvious disconnect between politicians in any country and their constituency. If they can't live what is broadly across society a traditional life. And when I say traditional, it doesn't have to be just a man and a woman and married. It can be couples of any sex or any gender or any age, and they can be married or not married. But to have that base, that home base, and to be able to create whatever they define as family, to have that become an impossibility if one wants to stay in politics, and to become a imperative that they leave if they want the family. This speaks to a lot of the problems between our society and our politicians.
Yeah, for sure. And it concerns me now because the population of elected politicians is getting younger and younger. So the chances of them having met their person before
Right.
entering politics is reducing. And it is, with those lovely, wise female politicians that I speak to, make it really clear that they got into politics and they wouldn't have survived had they not had that loving partner that they'd already met. They maybe already had their child, or certainly, even if they became pregnant whilst in politics, they've got that support at home. Now, if you are a single elected politician, it's very, very hard. So it's even harder then to sort of hold yourself to account if you haven't got a person at home waiting for you to make sure that you do try and balance out and leave the office, because you love your job. Politicians love what they do, so then they want to keep on doing it, and it's hard to tear them away from it if you haven't even got a person to help you tear away from it. That's really difficult.
We all need someone to help us stay grounded.
Mm-hmm.
We all need someone to help us stay grounded, whether it is our sister who we go out to dinner with once a week and go out on day trips on the weekend. If you are completely consumed, you can't do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or whether it is a partner.
Exactly.
What was the experience that you witnessed and that you learned about as all of these female politicians who are now starting to make way for a legitimate percentage of female presence in the houses of politics around the world? What did you learn from them? What is their experience at this point in terms of navigating those arenas?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I learned an awful lot from, and I'm still learning an awful lot from those that I work with now in my current role. But I think that tenacity of spirit was the most pivotal quality of character that I have learned from them. I think yeah, the female politicians in particular have this tenacity of spirit to get through, or sometimes bulldoze their way through, or quietly sort of find their grace to stay in the room at moments where it must have taken all of what they had to listen to hear what they were hearing and take it, and then and still speak, or still sort of stay in politics. So a tenacious spirit is something that I'd say is a very important kind of role model from politicians, and that's not just because the job is tough. It's actually because they genuinely care. I haven't worked with a single politician who isn't in it for a purpose, to serve their community or to get things done, and that gives them that tenacious spirit.
Absolutely. And do you find that more prominent in the female politicians than the men? The reason I ask is because it's well documented how much higher women's empathy quotient is than men's. So do you find that plays out, or how do you find that plays out in the halls of politics?
That's a really interesting question. Obviously, everybody is different, and I've actually I found that the layers that women have to develop in politics also covers their empathy in the halls of Parliament, not necessarily in community when they're with their citizens, but in the halls of Parliament, which are dominated by a particular way of doing things, and also in the caucuses of their parties, those layers come out. So you wouldn't necessarily know. I could not hand on heart say I've noticed a difference in the empathy displays between male and female politicians, and in fact, I'd probably argue that there was a greater display of empathy amongst male politicians, perhaps because they didn't have to fight as hard.
Exactly. They're not trying to overcome the stigmas.
Exactly. And it matters, the impact of having to layer yourself up, and for good reason, right? So, but I I've heard many of a story where it's, run straight to privacy in bathroom, to not be seen, to cry amongst other female politicians, let alone male politicians, amongst women. So yeah, that's obviously was compelled me to really dig into how to shape shift that, because that's, I think, such a real shame, because it's a core advantage, a critical advantage of being a woman.
It is a
So
critical
let's try and
advantage.
play on it.
Yes. What would you say, and I'm going to do this in two parts. What would you say to any struggling male politician?
Mm-hmm. So I mean, my approach is typically to try and sort of map out their life world, to sort of identify where the pain point is. It can take a little while, but slow is best. And really, for male politicians, it's probably around, finding a language for vulnerability, because they're so layered, but they're also so silenced. They sort of almost get so good at it they don't realize that they're self-silencing. So the advice obviously would depend on what I'd mapped out, but most of the time it will, it'll just come down to one thing, which is disclosure. The disclosure is a great healer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what would you say to any struggling female politician?
Yes, and so if maybe disclosure is, disclosure of the male politician, might be pick up a journal and write it out. And it's funny that journaling sort of, if I were to give journaling a gender, I'd say it's a female practice. But actually, I have to sort of put that first on my list with male politicians that I work with as a form of disclosure, because it's less confronting. They can definitely do it without sort of losing any shame or sort of feeling any shame. Whereas with female politicians, same remedy, disclosure, but I would say community. Try and disclose in community, and that seems to be, obviously journaling is fine if they want to do it, but it seems to be more of a likely option, because sort of community, amongst women is very important, in politics. It's very important for every single person on the planet, but particularly as a remedy for female struggles in politics.
What would you say to any young woman with political aspirations? What would you give her as advice to help her to arm herself to not become armored?
Oh yeah, that's the perennial question, actually. Yeah, it's really, it's a tricky one, and I'm going to be working on that particular question for the rest of my life. How to nurture primarily that soft front while making sure that you have a titanium hard back, because you do need both, but the titanium hard back cannot come at the expense of that soft front, for either gender. And so, if you're entering into politics, I think really just you can do the eyes wide open and you can forewarn, but you really need to walk them through an experience. You can be told 1,000 times that going to the military is going to be tough, but until you're on that drill, you don't feel it. And in politics, it's even worse, because you are so pumped up and full of purpose. And purpose is an incredible drug. I can imagine
It
it's
is. It's an
it's really,
aphrodisiac.
it is, right? So
Yes.
we know it. You've written a book. You're full of purpose when you're writing that book, and you lived and breathed it. Now that is a politician, to tell them to gear up for not feeling good, they're not going to really take it in. So I'd say, I just advise them to have their have their journals at the ready, and to not stop talking about themselves. I think one of the main things that I found in my research and work is that sort of unconscious self-silencing. And that's where all of the inner humanity starts to erode, and that soft front gets hard, because they forget to check in with themselves and stay connected with themselves. And in fact, it's quite shameful to talk about yourself and your own humanity. But if you can't connect with yourself, there's no way you can connect with others. And we all know why it happens. It's a very toxic space, but what to do about it is hard. So the only real solid advice is to work out before they enter how it is that they stay most connected with themselves. It could be, isolated grounding practices, walking, journaling, music, could be in community, could be their dog or family, but there's got to be multiple ways that are simple and don't require that much energy or time that they can integrate into their very busy political life worlds, and make sure that they do that as much as possible to stay soft, to nurture that sort of soft inner human that will get hardened and at risk.
And yes, and do it regularly and prioritize it. I have to add prioritize it on, because women are terrible about letting everyone and everything else become the priority. So taking your wonderful skills and that you have suggested and prioritizing those, that can serve any woman in business, but I can see where it would certainly serve women in politics. One thing as we get ready to close that I want to go back to, you said you can't really be prepared until you're in it, which is so true about a multitude of moments and experiences in life. I don't know how it is in Europe, but I know over here that young men are quite prone to have an advocate or a mentor that takes them on, and young women have to work harder to find that. Is it similar in Europe, or are the mentorship opportunities, the opportunities to have someone be your sponsor and open the door on your behalf, metaphorically open the door, are they equalizing in Europe?
Yeah, the cost of politics varies dramatically depending on the country, and essentially the electoral system. So, but yes, I mean, there are challenges once you overcome sort of the financial aspect, which, we are trying to shift to allow women to enter even without those finances. And there's lots of organizations working really hard to sponsor women to do that. I think in terms of that advocacy, it really depends on how many women are already in that space. So I heard such wonderful stories of where if there is just a small group of women in a party caucus, they will be very tight. But the more it sort of equalizes out, the more it's sort of open warfare. And it's like, okay, then it's easier to compete with another woman than to maybe compete with another man. And that brings in a whole new dimension of sort of sisterhood, really, and how to and the problem isn't sisterhood, it's still patriarchy, obviously.
Exactly. They fall out of that moment of sisterhood that helped them bond and help them get into those positions, and they fall into the patriarchy, which has been oppressing them and all women for all time.
Yeah, and then whether or not there's a quota system will affect it, because obviously, in quota systems may often lead to sort of women emulating the behaviors of men because they sort of feel they need to live up to those norms. And in other parties, they don't have a quota system, so women just sort of are themselves and make it on their own sort of merit and esteem and style, and then carry on in that style. And all of those norms of behavior and being a politician will change the extent to which they support and help each other in particular ways. So that's microcultural,
It's
a micro
basically
context.
human nature at work.
It really is human nature work. Yeah, a great question.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for coming on and sharing your adventures with understanding these political dramas and the pitfalls and the opportunities, and for giving all women an opportunity to remember the patriarchy is not just in your neighborhood.
Mm-mm.
It's not just your representative. It's everywhere. And the more we talk about it and the more we come together as women, the less power it's going to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Bit by bit.
Yes. So thank you for coming on and being a wonderful guest and illuminating just more, a little bit more insight into that dastardly tradition, and particularly the ways in which women internalize the misogyny, because that's my soapbox, is women who are internalizing that misogyny. Now, we're going to do for you what we always do for you listeners. We're going to put Dr. Hasson's URL. We're going to put her whatever contact information she wants to give you. We're going to put it in the program notes so that it will be available and you can connect with her and have communication. Also, when we launch this on YouTube, be sure, and for those of you who were just listening because you were jogging or driving, if you were driving, I hope you were only listening, you can go to YouTube and actually view this particular episode, and be sure and like and subscribe and share. Share with any woman who you know could be impacted by our conversation today. So again, thank you, Victoria.
Thank you so much.
And as you go through the rest of your days, please remember, you are stronger and you are wiser than you know.